welcome to this month's edition of Stephen's Squibs, brought to you by the Center for Child Counseling. It's time to gather around the proverbial fire and discuss Florida family law cases and more. Please welcome your host, Eddie Stevens. And now, a discussion of the Florida Bar's disciplinary orders since our last meeting. Welcome to Stephen's Sandbox, a segment where a Florida family law legend steps into the sandbox with Eddie or Karen Stevens to discuss ethics, professionalism, their career, and staying sane in such a high-conflict industry. Are you ready? It's time to step into Stephen's Sandbox.
Ladies and gentlemen, with me today, a very special guest, board-certified AAML legend, Equitable Distribution Guru. I'm talking about the past chair of the Family Law Section and president of the Florida chapter of AAML, David Manz. David, are you with us?
I am.
Thank
How
you.
are you, Eddie?
I am well. Thank you for sharing your time with us and letting us pick your brain about some very important topics for Florida lawyers.
I'm glad to be here.
How are you doing with the pandemic and everything? The show is airing on December 15th and everybody's getting ready for the holidays. How are you doing, David?
Well, it's interesting. It's certainly a paradigm shift. Nobody could have imagined practicing sort of alone in the office with everybody remote. But we're live by Zoom. All our hearings, all our trials are by Zoom. We're meeting clients by Zoom. So my life is essentially virtual. Because the county's linear and 100 miles long and about the width of a pencil thick, and I've got people up and down the Keys working with me, I've decided to leave them working remote, and they're actually more productive, and life is ongoing even though I'm in the office, just me. So all our mediations are remote. It's really, who could have imagined it in February? But
Yes.
Here we are.
Well, we are all upgrading our equipment and prettying up for the Zoom camera. Now, the county you mentioned, of course, is Marathon because you practice down south. How did a young West Palm Beach boy like you end up in the Florida Keys?
To make a long story short, it goes back to my grandfather, who was a employee at Chrysler in Detroit in the late 40s with all his brothers. The family had come from Germany in the 1830s, and we settled in Ohio and Sandusky and Toledo and Detroit. So he got really sick of the cold, and he said, I'm going to take my friend's advice and move to Miami. And he did. He loved to fish. He was a Great Lakes fisherman, and he started coming down to the Keys. He brought my dad. My dad fell in love with fishing. So here I am, a kid in West Palm. My dad's a Pratt engineer, and every summer he'd bring us kids down to the Keys, to Islamorada, learned to fish, loved to fish, fell in love with it. And then went to law school after I had been to Auburn and was practicing in Birmingham. The firm imploded. I said, I'm going to jump back to South Florida. I looked at offers, West Palm, Miami, and the Keys, and I was a young single guy, 27. I said, I'm going to give it a shot. And fast forward, here it is 32 years later, 33 years, come this March. Fell in love, got married, raised a family. Now the girls are grown up, and here I am.
Wow. How did you fall into family law? Was that something that you planned, or?
No, I think it worked out best because it found me. When I started with a firm that I came to in Marathon, it was a 6-person firm. I had a real good mentor in Birmingham, a guy named Bob Lee. Robert Wythe Lee Jr. was a great trial lawyer, did products work. I learned to do products liability, jury trials, and he was a great guy, great mentor. Then when I moved down here, I didn't have that. And the firm got a bunch of good-sized divorce cases, and I had to go it alone. I kind of taught myself to do it. I watched the great ones in Miami, Kuttner, and that ilk, and saw what they were doing, saw what the family law section was doing, wanted to get involved, as I saw that was an outlet or a way to become sharp. And it found me. I started my own firm a year or two later and was doing everything under the sun, but all the referrals seemed to be, or the best referrals seemed to be family law. So within a year or two, by 93, I was doing family law about 80, 90%, and went ahead and said, which is a different story. I should get board certified, and that's really the way to get to be the best. And so that led to its own sort of circuitous path. But anyway, that's kind of it. It found me. I didn't look for it.
Now, you've been doing this for 30 years, and a lot of us go crazy by then. How do you stay sane in such an insane world?
Well, that's remains a work in progress, and maybe the answer is not evident yet. But seriously, my theory is that to really be good at this, you have to be passionate, and yet at the same time know where that fine line is to let it go, and not eat you alive, and not let the case become your case. And I've been guilty of letting my cases become my case. I've had most great victories, but I've had a few crushing sort of warn the client that she was going to lose primary residential responsibility or lose parental, and she did because of her conduct. I've had those kind of cases, and they're horrific. So over time, with scathing emotional bruising warfare, I've tried to navigate that. Be great at what you do, be very passionate, but don't live and die it. Also, I think, and you probably experience this in your own life and practice, Eddie, because you're well-rounded Renaissance guy, very eclectic guy. My theory is you've got to have some things in your life that are equal to this in terms of sort of intensity, passion, knowledge, commitment, things like that. So I've got these things over here that are equal in import to this over here, being the practice.
Keep it very well balanced. Well, David, I learned of you going to board cert review and watching you talk about equitable distribution for many years. And I don't think that there is anyone in Florida that is more learned on that subject.
Thank you. I've tried to be. I've tried to make myself that.
Why equitable distribution?
Well, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I was an economics major at Auburn. I love sort of macroeconomics, I'll call it. I love the way the parts of the economy fit together and work, and I love the micro view too. I thought about sort of being at the same time a finance guru guy in maybe going to get a PhD in economics, and law school sort of became really attractive. And then when I started the business of family law, and I saw this milieu of work out there, from my view, most time sharing cases is babysitting. I mean, I don't like the way I view it. Good parents can get along and solve their case and solve their problem. And there are a few people who are really good people and have these dramatically opposed views, and apparently they need to go to trial on their kids. But it just drives me crazy. I hate it. It's toxic. I've done a lot of it. I made at some point a decision, and so I can't not do any of it. In other words, there's always a piece of it around there. But I said, I really love solving people's financial issues, and for whatever reason, I just fell into it like right away. About the time I started, the statute had become in place in '88. There were some new cases out there, Robertson, that were construing the statute and trying to resolve, and how are we going to deal with special equity? And it just was really fascinating. And I said, this is a really deep dive. A lot of people in family law tend to look at it as a superficial, let's go into court and let's just argue from places of being in the gutter and smear each other and all that. And I don't like that at all. I think it can be a real professional, intellectual exercise. And the deeper you go into property distribution, whether it be choice of valuation dates, things like that, you find that's the case.
Like a really neat puzzle, I guess.
It is. It's a puzzle. It's a balancing act, and there's a million nuances.
Now, before the pandemic, you took cases all over the state. And I see now that video teleconferencing is much more prevalent. A lot of people are kind of following that route. What advice would you give them?
Well, in terms of doing that and learning to do that,
Like doing a statewide practice versus me. I try to stick in my county. It's my comfort level. I know my judges. Um, I I rarely go out of Palm Beach and maybe Martin or Broward. But for those, now it seems like we don't have those restrictions because travel is no
Yeah, it's
longer an
actually
issue.
easier. Yeah, it's easier. I recently took, quote unquote, a Tallahassee case. My guy was on the wrong side of a venue decision, so the county was determined to be Leon in terms of where they last resided. My guy didn't agree, but wanted me to stay in and handle the property. So we're doing that. And a good friend of mine, Kristen Adamson's on the case, the other side, and I know all the players. I've been going up to Tallahassee for years doing legislative work. So Jerome Novi's actually going to mediate the case. And so it's really a small world. As far as doing it, the way I found that I did it, and again, I didn't plan on it, but my advice will be put yourself out there. Now, what does that mean? I started to lecture through a lot of friends who I'd been doing family law work for, and commentator committee, and one connection leads to another. That segues into, if you want to develop, in my mind, any kind of a statewide presence, anything, then join the family law section. And you would appreciate that, whether it be the certification committee I've worked with you on, the family law section, and then working your way up into the academy, because there's not that many people in this state of however many million who are really high-end dissolution of marriage practitioners. There's a relative handful out of the 10,000 who do it. And pretty soon, if you do that, you're going to know everybody, you're going to meet everybody. And somewhere along the way, somebody's going to give you a shot saying, will you lecture? Will you do this? Will you write? And then put yourself out there. And before you know it, and I found this, I would be lecturing at Cert Review. I met lawyers from all over the state who come up after their little lecture and say, what about this? What about this? Can you come into this case? I found friends that I started doing work in Pensacola for, and then Stewart. And before you know it, I got asked to come into various personal goodwill cases, or unequal distribution cases, or choice evaluation day cases. And it's funny, Eddie, I would say, people say, why do you write bar journal articles? They take so much time. They do. But I've got to tell you, I've gotten a handful of really big cases from every bar journal article I've written, just because the marketing is a tangent of writing. I love to write, and it's a deep dive into the topic, but the side effect is amazing, really.
That reminds me of the very first time I ever spoke in a legal seminar. I was asked to speak on a topic I knew nothing about at the time, how to value real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time that seminar came up, I was an expert. And
that is a great little side note that I should have said, which is the act of writing or the act of lecturing, by definition, makes you an expert, because you will not be prepared. And if you didn't know it in the beginning, like you said, you'll know it as the nth degree of expert. I wrote an article years ago of, are financial affidavits really necessary? And I thought I knew the topic. By the time I got done, I had relearned and gotten a much better sense of the parameters than before I started.
So that's funny. Let's talk about some of your service. You've been the section leader for the family law section. You've led Florida AAML. You've even done the Florida Bar Foundation, raising important money for the Florida bar. Why do you think all of that is important?
I think a combination of things. I think board certification, without question, makes you better lawyers. So the process of getting into the family law section sort of ties in with board certification, because you see the best lawyers, you see people who are board certified. I and Michelle Klinger Smith with my firm, and Sherry Smallwood have been the only board certified lawyers in my county for sort of decades, since '93 when Sherry and I came in. She might have, I think, been a year ahead of me. But what happens when you go around the state, you see all these great lawyers. And so it's easy to want to aspire to that. It's great giving back to the community, so to speak, through section work. I love mentoring people. with the Academy, Peter Gladstone a few years ago wanted to develop this project of having every Academy member mentor. And I started mentoring a person and it's turned into a really good friend in Stuart, Nikki Marshall, and working with a young lawyer in Hollywood right now, Dina Gutierrez. And I realized a lot of younger lawyers don't have the mentorship, and I didn't really have it starting out, and it's invaluable. So that ties in with all this becoming a better lawyer and kind of giving back. The Bar Foundation I found really, really meaningful, because when the interest rate plummeted after the last crash, bar revenues went down dramatically. I've always believed, and I do a lot of pro bono work. I was fortunate enough to get that award and go to Tallahassee two years ago and get the pro bono award for the county. I really believe in this access to justice, and find that people don't have justice when they don't have a good lawyer. And so that ties in with Bar Foundation work in developing and getting enough money to fund the programs. Way back when, in a prior life, I'm through my first year of law school, I was pounding the pavement in Palm Beach County trying to get a job. Bob Burdish was just incredibly helpful and said, come in and start working for you. Maybe we'll give you a check at the end of the summer. I was going out to Okeechobee, Clewiston, doing all these cases. And he was an incredible guy, but I saw how pro bono or service work worked in legal services. So it all ties together.
And you are also part of the committee that rewrote the Bounds of Advocacy a couple of years ago for the family section, which I don't think a lot of family attorneys know that there's an option to being a zealous advocate out there, and some really neat stuff in the Bounds that gives us guidance where I think it's necessary, because the rules of professional responsibility just don't address the issues we have to deal with every day. What was your experience?
No, they don't. It was amazing. There were a lot of really great lawyers, friends of mine from around the state, judges, Melinda Gameau, Richard West, Ashley Myers in Tallahassee, judge in Palm Beach County. Really, really incredible, because that's always been looked at as going beyond the basics. You know, there's these basics, and we have to wake up every day and sort of point due north and maintain the essentials core of the ethics, about being professional, but being transparent and telling people the truth, and being respectful of judges, and never cutting corners, and always being a person of our word. And those are basics. But this the Bounds talk about things that transcend that. How to have this concept of trying to resolve cases without roughshod litigation and without scorched earth litigation, and handling social media, and how to behave in sort of the 21st century. There was a case I saw the other day in the Florida bar site, where somebody had gotten aggrieved, a lawyer, because they were on the wrong side of their own domestic violence injunction, and they just took to social media and excoriated the other side, and it just developed into literally World War IV, and there was an emergency suspension.
Yeah, that attorney is now disbarred. So
I suspected as much.
And
there was a guy
the injunction was reversed, but because it didn't really rise to the level,
right.
But she was disbarred, and it was a really interesting. We've had a lot of disciplinary issues over young attorneys not being able to properly regulate themselves on social media.
Well, it also reminded me, like I said, we wake up every day, and we, notwithstanding what we've done in the past, we have a chance to do the wrong thing or the right thing. A big story in the New York Times last week was a significant lawyer out of Miami who represented some witnesses who were apparently on the wrong end of an assault and robbery or a big scene at a party involving NFL players who supposedly strong-armed some of the witnesses. And the lawyer attempted to gain financial funds, so to speak, in exchange for testimony. State attorney got involved, emergency suspension, arrest, and the guy had been AV rated. So it reminded me that notwithstanding where we were yesterday, we've got a chance to do whatever we want today. And I found the work with the bar on the bounds really brought home about how it's a daily it's a daily exercise in doing the right thing.
Yes. Not only do you do trial work, but you've been a part of some pretty major appellate opinions in Florida history. Do you have a favorite?
It's really interesting. I thought about that question, and I've had a couple. I had a case called Anapole Norwood, which stood for the rule that the court can use a separation date as a valuation date, and that wasn't a finely tuned or finely enhanced concept at the time it came out. The law in the valuation statute had kind of come full circle from a presumption of petition, and then that went away. And the judge at the time of this decision, which it is now, does not have any presumption, but there hadn't been much use of a separation date. So I found an ALR site, went out my Westlaw program, paid the money for it. I think it was an ALR third site. And I think in the appellate opinion, I cited virtually every case or made note that there are 20 cases around the nation that you've used separation date as a valuation date. And so that case, I've got a lot of calls over the years about using that case, and that tied in with the Bar Journal article. So I found that pretty neat. Another case was this White versus White case, which allowed the court to use, instead of a straight line coverture fraction for valuing a pension, can use a time value. And it's not known that there's that alternative theory, but I've been able to sort of use that successfully. So that's been kind of neat. It's interesting, the more trial work I did led to more appellate work, and I haven't been doing, I've been settling the probably 90% of my cases in the past years. I don't do much trial work anymore because I think I really believe in mediation. And so it's kind of segued into that.
If you have two good lawyers, you don't need a trial judge.
That's a good point. And of course, the clients have to be along for the ride. I don't know about you, but I settled the great majority of my cases.
Going back to board cert, some people are intimidated just because of the passage rate seems to be kind of skewed.
Yeah.
What tips would you give people that may be nervous or maybe taking the test next year?
Well, that is a challenge. The rate has been formidable for certain in terms of that low rate, whether it be less than 10% or whatever. What my encouragement would be that as I was on the committee and we saw people like Tom Sasser come through and people like that and just blew it out of the water, that if you're really prepared and do great work, you're going to be fine on it. And what I mean by that is, I'll be honest, I didn't pass it the first time. And I went back and I say that candidly because, I believe in transparency, but I redoubled my efforts. And I mean, I realized the next year it took a year. It wasn't those things. I had a practice. I was married. I didn't have children yet, but it wasn't those, you can pull it off in 3 months. It literally took a year of working my way through. Brenda Abrams has that wonderful set, looking at that time at the Red Books, looking at all the appellate decisions over the last year. At that time, I started buying that green book, the Florida
the annual
Law Weekly. Yeah, the annual. Mm-hmm. And so I bought, it's really neat. I've continued to buy every year. I've got this complete library going back to 1990. It's really cool. Kind of nerdy, but I remember it started in 1990, and I read every case from 90 to 93. So, I mean, I felt like there was no way they would not let me through that next year. And it was probably because I didn't get it the first year. And I said, a lot of people can say that. A lot of great people in the academy didn't get in the academy the first time. And it made me realize it does take that much work, but at the same time, there's 300 lawyers or whatever it is now in the state who are board certified. So it certainly, by all means, can be done. And it's been invaluable. It makes you a better lawyer. And the best advice I ever got when I started out was there was a guy who's passed away, but he was in the county, and he said, don't be one of these generalists. I think in the Keys, particularly, at least through the 70s and into the 80s, you could be a generalist. And guys did wills. It was like kind of the small town Atticus Finch kind of thing. They had jury trials, they do civil trials, they do divorce. They would do everything. But then as the 80s progressed, people realized the desire to get specialized. And now you don't really find generalists in this county. I'm sure yours the same way. People do one thing generally and do it, relatively well or not, but specialize. And certainly board certification is part of that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I just tell people, hey, if I could pass it, hopefully
I kind of the same way. I mean, I'm not smarter than anybody else. I might work harder, but it's formidable, but it certainly can be done when you realize how much it takes.
And going through the process, even if you don't pass, makes you a better lawyer.
There's no question. Yeah.
And I don't think anyone I've talked to has ever said something contradictory to that.
I absolutely agree. There's no question. I remember, you probably can say this, is there's no better feeling those first months or year after taking the test, because you walk into court and there's no question you can't answer about the statute or about the case law.
At least for a couple of years till some of it becomes gray.
That's
and
right.
then you serve on the board cert committee and you relearn it all again and
you
again.
Relearn it because you have to learn it again, which you've done. So that's to be commended too.
And I think that's probably the hardest committee to work on out there.
Took a lot of work, right? Tremendous amount of work.
Yeah, writing and grading and peer review. It's a lot. Becoming board cert is a big deal, and it's more than just a test. And I think people don't realize how important, for example, peer review is, and peer review can prevent you from becoming board cert
or staying board cert. And
right. Every
people
5
don't
years.
realize, and people don't realize, particularly in a small county, I'm in front of all my judges all the time. I mean, there's only 4, or there's actually, I think there's only 4 circuit judges in the county.
Wow.
So I know all of them very well in terms of I've been in front of them from decades, or as long as they've been on the bench. And so to your point, peer review in terms of judicial review is a huge deal. And it is at the academy too.
What advice would you give some of these younger attorneys, besides having a mentor, for them to develop a long-term sustainable career in family law?
Well, I think there's a couple things, Eddie. There's no question that being the best and being to the level of being board certified, whether you're board certified or not, is a core skill or a core ability to do that. Because I think most people are in this because, whether they realize it or not, they love to help and they love to give back. And I believe in this theory that you're not necessarily born for a purpose, but you certainly can find one. And my thing is to be able to help people at their rock bottom. I really get a lot out of that. And at the same time, you've got to have a skill set to do that. I mean, if a doctor really, I analogize our work to a doctor. They don't necessarily want to see an oncologist, but it's the most important person in their life while they're in their life. So, but how does an oncologist help? By being the very best. You can't help people if you're making mistakes. So it's a combination of having that passion to really help people or do the best, because we're not just grinding sausage. I think that'll burn people out. And having the skill set to do it, but also recognizing we've got to have that balance. We can't live the cases. And at the same time, it's like there's 4 legs to the table. It's not just an art. I remember a guy in Birmingham told me this is an art. It's a practice. It's not a business. That's true, but we both know as small business owners, it truly is a business. We've got to pay people. We might have PPP loans, whatever it is we've got. That there's these financial aspects of it. And I've gone to Atticus. I love it. They talk about A, B, C, D clients. A clients are clients who pay and listen. So unless you're just rich and just absolutely altruistic and doing it because you're your own little LLC legal services firm, that it is a business, and people have to remember that. And as they get better and handle better cases, that's a snowball that gets bigger and faster and rolls downhill. I handled terrible cases when I started that didn't pay, and people that didn't listen, the D client, so to speak, in Atticus.
Oh,
so
the quality of life changes when you.
it changes dramatically.
Well, David,
So that would be my advice.
Is there any other point you wanted to add and hit on in our time together that maybe I haven't asked you about that would be helpful?
I would encourage somebody new starting out to find a mentor some way or another. You call the academy. There are people around the state who mentor. I mentor. I love mentoring people. It is a really huge way to get better. I've seen problematically the younger attorneys who aren't in a firm, and so many family law attorneys kind of start and it's just them. They're not associated at one of the bigger firms in the state, and there's not that many to begin with, as we both know, even in your area. It's hard to get that mentorship when you're by yourself and all you've got is adversaries, right? It's hard to learn these intangibles from great lawyers, and that really, you've probably found it. I've found it invaluable as I started, and learning from people who'd been around the block and been practicing 30 years. That experience is invaluable. How to deal with 100 different situations. And so if you're by yourself, I'd really encourage you to do that and find that mentor and find somebody to thread that needle with ethical issues, with dealing with pragmatics, dealing with difficult lawyers, dealing with scorched earth litigation, all that. That'd be my advice.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today on our program and helping us with our CLE and being one of the legends of Florida family law.
I don't know about that, but in his own mind, maybe, who knows, but I was honored to have this opportunity and enjoyed this today greatly.
Well, we bestow that title upon you. So thank you for your time, David.
Absolutely.
And thank you for your participation.
Hey, thanks a lot. Great seeing you again, and good talking with you, bud.
All right.
Take care now. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this month's edition of Stephen Squibb's Monthly Family Law CLE. We hope to see you again next month. In the meantime, do something that matters. Visit www.eddiestevens.com for more information.